think the discussion today, we would be focusing a lot on what we have been experiencing around a topic that is close to many people, independent of which part of an organization you're working on or which part of uh, industry you're working on. I think the area of automation and automation of processes more specifically, and not necessarily having it called as robotics, but that's obviously a very important part of what we see as process automation around the world. Joining me today in this webinar that's hosted by IVS Intelligence along with Expleo are some very interesting and eminent leaders from the industry. We have Krishnan Gopi Krish, who is the Group Chief Digital Disruption Officer at GEMS Education, as he calls it, as the world's largest education conglomerate. He has been, quote unquote, the disruptor in chief, for more than 2 decades with a lot of experience, most of it in the banking and financial services sector. He's worked with various large institutions around the world, including Citi, Fidelity, First Abu Dhabi Bank, BMI, and more recently with QIB in Qatar and Al Hilal Bank in the UAE. And now he is heading the disruption. He's the chief disruption officer, as he calls it, in a very interesting organization called the GEMS. Also with me is Mr. Balaji Krishnamurthy. Balaji is the chief operating officer at the National Bank of Fujairah. Again, comes with a lot of experience with international banks, including Barclays and HSBC, and quite a few regional institutions in the past, NBD and Q Invest. But more importantly and more interestingly, Balaji has been spearheading a lot of interesting initiatives at his current organization, particularly in the space of process automation. And some of my conversations that I've had with him earlier have always been fascinating, and I'm looking forward to a very, very interesting conversation with Balaji, and his insights I'm sure is going to be useful for all of us. We also have with us Vijay Mohan. Vijay is the head of technical services at Expleo. The technical services, in addition to test automation, focuses a lot in the space of process automation and DevOps. And again, Vijay comes not only from an experience on quality assurance as a space, but he brings a lot of financial services experience, not only with the clients he deals with, but he used to work for more than 20 years, if I'm not wrong, Vijay, with National Insurance. So there's a lot of interesting, very rich experience on the panel. This afternoon, Dubai time afternoon, and depending on where you are in the second half of the day. Before I get into the discussion today, I do want to give a little bit of context to how we would structure the discussion today. We would be having a very interesting conversation with each of the panel members. Vijay also has a presentation to make. I would encourage the audience to post their questions on the Q&A button. You can actually click on it on your screen and you can post your questions. We would do our best to actually have them directed to the respective panelists and get them answered. What we would also have, it's unfair that you ask us questions. It is only fair that we ask the audience a few questions. So we would be running a series of polls, through the session today to also see what your perspectives on a number of topics related to today's topic are. So why don't I start with the first poll before we jump to the first panelist? And here is the first question for the audience. And I presume you can see the screen out there. And the question is, what, in your view, is the primary driver for process automation? Is it reduction of cost? Is it improving customer experience? Is it increasing consistency and efficiency? Or is it optimizing your org workforce? Unfortunately or fortunately, we don't have all of the above as an option. So you will have to choose one of these four, and let's see what takes the lead today. We'll have another 30 seconds before we'll close this poll. And it's interesting that some of the topics we'll talk today is going to hover around some of these. And the panelists are equally interested to know what you say because they do have some views on this, I'm sure, as well. We have 65% people having voted. I think we still have another 35% people to poll. I request everyone to cast your votes. Okay, and I guess I will close the poll now. And let's see the result. And the topper of that list is increasing consistency and efficiency. Interesting, right? And people don't necessarily see this as an optimization of org workforce as much as they see the other three options. That's quite fascinating. And Krish, and maybe I will, in this context, I'll jump into, maybe I'll start with you, and maybe if I can ask you, there's always this misunderstanding, right, between what is RPA and what it is not. So maybe if I can ask you, I guess you may have to unmute yourself, and if you can share with us what your thoughts on that are.
Absolutely, Ram. Thank you so much. You are right. There is a huge misunderstanding in the minds of not only normal staff, even with key stakeholders on what RPA is and what RPA isn't. I think if we have to speak in English and define RPA, RPA is setting up software bots to execute set of repeated tasks in a manner that mimics exactly how a human would execute the same tasks. And it's predominantly used for systems that do not have the advanced automation or workflow capabilities. Now, RPA isn't humanoid robotics. They're not physical. They cannot be emotional. They can't take sympathetic decisions. They cannot take all the decisions on their own as well, at least not yet. So even though there are huge advancements of cognitive automation that is happening in the world, in my opinion, they are miles away from replacing humans entirely.
Interesting. So if I was to drill a little down that route, I mean, what would you think would make or break an RPA initiative, considering that it's emotionless, as you call it? In what would actually make it succeed, and what do you think doesn't or makes it a non-successful initiative?
Thank you. Having done many RPA projects, some of them successful, some of them not so, and for various external reasons and internal reasons, let me give you my perspectives of key factors that would make or break an RPA initiative. Having a good start is very, very important. My suggestion of a good start would be doing a detailed business process re-engineering exercise, understanding what your processes are, documenting it, understanding how you can do a re-engineering. It is absolutely critical to optimize your processes before automating it. Let me repeat it. Maybe somebody missed it. Optimizing your processes before automating it. Let's all be very, very clear, right? Automating a bad process doesn't make it any better. Actually, it makes it the worst. So having a good start with a BPM exercise is the key. The second most important is to clearly define the objective of why do you want to do this project or an initiative at all. Is it to reduce the turnaround times? Is it increasing controls? Is it increasing efficiency? Is it reducing cost overheads? Is it reducing people? Just clearly define why do you want to do it? What's your North Star, or what is your end objective? And be realistic on how much can you automate, right? That's the third important point. And let's all understand and accept that not all processes are good candidates for automation. So it's very important to be realistic. And over-reliance or over-expectation on RPA should also be managed, especially with the board and the senior management. RPA is not your silver bullet. It can't solve all your problems at all. And again, finally, as the famous saying goes, if ain't broken, don't try to fix it. And that applies to some of your processes as well. You'd be surprised that that is a very, very key word. It comes. If I ain't broken, don't try to fix it. The fourth important thing is change management, right? Articulate what is in it for each of the stakeholder. And I always say in this kind of transformation program, it's about 20% technology, remaining 80% about change management, making stakeholders accepted, expectation setting, etc., etc. So change management is the most important thing. And the fifth one, selecting the right tool is going to make it or break it for you as well. When I say selecting the right product, it's about functional richness of the product, ease of implementation, how scalable is it for every other processes in your organization, how secure is it, what's the total cost of ownership, right integration partner, and a right support partner. It doesn't exist in another part of the universe, and you can't get the right support, etc. So these are all key factors in selecting the right tool for your RPA success. The last but not the least, business ownership and accountability is the most critical. Your RPA initiative is going to be a huge failure if it is not owned by the right stakeholders. Let's assume RPA is a movie round. The HR, the business, and the operation functions are part of this RPA movie itself. They are the directors, heroes, music directors, etc. Right? They're not the audience. They're not there to come, take a nice cushion sofa, eat popcorn, and to be critic of the movie. They are pretty much part and parcel of the movie. So those 6 things, I would say, would make or break your RPA journey.
It's an amazing analogy. I hope you're not copyrighted it. I'm going to use it. It's amazing. No, I mean, you touched a very interesting way of putting things right. I mean, if I was to just crystallize it, I mean, what are you doing it for? What are you doing and why are you doing it? And then how are you doing it? And then who are the stakeholders? I mean, in terms of partners or in terms of your beneficiaries. I think it's a very interesting perspective you've drawn there. But that brings me to, the last point you touched about, right? I mean, and we've always seen this movie and so far, although these days with COVID, I don't think people are watching in theaters as much as they do from home, but nevertheless, popcorn is always there. Question really is that, in your experience, have you dealt with this perception? And there is a large perception out there that RPA is generally a technology-led initiative. And you just articulated that, be it business or HR or operations, they are part of the movie and they are cast in the movie and they are not outsiders. How do you actually who drives an RPA initiative in an organization? Is it technology? Is it business? If you can throw some light on that.
So, having Balaji in this panel, I'd be interested to see his reaction to this answer as well. For me, RPA is not a technology-led project. It is a business-led initiative that is supported by technology, not the other way around. The sponsor should never be the CIO or CTO. It should be the CEO or COO or the business head of that function, for a primary reason that the stakeholder needs to be bought in, not the enabler, not the implementer. So, that's my personal opinion. And, my experience has shown that if it is business-led, it has huge benefits than the other way around.
But you have this perennial, and you started by saying these are not humanoids, and there is always this looming concern in everybody's head that RPA is out there to take away people's job, and especially when business leads these initiatives. How do you deal with that perception, and B, how true is that perception?
So, there are a lot of people who say people are afraid of robots will take their jobs. You rightly asked, will robots take people's job? My answer to those people are, you are more likely to be replaced by somebody who knows how to use a robot than actually being replaced by a robot, right? And I think that will be the true for years to come.
Well said. Well said. I think that was a very fascinating perspective there, Krishan. Uh,
Thank you.
there is one question here from Dimutu, and I'm going to pose that to you. What is your take on the poll answers that you got to see, right? When people said efficiency is the primary driver, or they saw it to be the more prominent, pertinent driver than others. You have a view on that?
I think absolutely. I think our audience are much more knowledgeable about RPA, which is a great sign. Efficiency is one of the key factors. Standardization, consistency, having the right controls is one of the key factors. And I'm so happy to see that answer, that most of our participants today are already in much steps ahead than most of the stakeholders that you would see now. Yeah.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you for that input, and we'll probably come back to you when there are more questions. But I just want to move on to our next panelist today, Vijay Mohan. Vijay, you have a presentation, I presume, to actually make to our audience today.
Yeah, Ram. I think, Ram, just to add on a note of a lighter note, I think you need to recheck the introduction you made about Chris. Because from what he has been saying, it appears that he has been even involved in process implementation and process automation all his life, not just in banking and education.
Not at all. I think he's a disruption officer by definition. Yeah. So, Krish, I guess more accolades your way.
I'll just share my screen so that is it visible now?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So I'll just give a short introduction before I move on to process automation. So we are Expleo Solutions, part of the global Expleo group, which provides management consulting, engineering, as well as quality assurance services in more than 30 countries globally. So we serve different verticals, different industries, ranging from aviation, BFSI, banking, entertainment, education, and so on. And this exposure to multiple industries has really helped us to innovate as on the technology front, so much so that we are recognized as leader in next generation and digital software testing services by Nelson Hall. Now, as far as Expleo Solutions itself is concerned, we specialize in the BFSI domain and additional domains such as education. So some of you may know us from our old avatar, that is ThinkSoft Global Services. We were then merged with the SQS group, and we are now part of the Expleo group. A key aspect of our services is that there is a fusion of both the domain aspect and as far as the technology aspect is concerned. So when I say a fusion of a domain, it's not just people who have experience in delivering these services in the particular industry, but actual experts and SMEs and business analysts who are drawn from the industry. For example, if you look at our BFSI delivery as such, we have SMEs who have worked for decades in the banking industry. We have business analysts who, at a minimum, have put in 5-6 years in various operational roles. And this, combined with our technology expertise, helps us to give a perfect fusion as far as delivery is concerned. And this is particularly important when it comes to process automation. I think what Krish said is very important in the sense that business needs to drive this initiative. And it's not just a business driving this initiative, it's also the knowledge of business aspects that plays an important role even from the implementer's perspective. And as you're aware of the evolution of process automation as such, we've had personal productivity tools being used for a long time. But over the past few decades, the couple of decades, I would say, robotic process automation has also caught on. Like Krish rightly pointed out, the focus has always been on the end user and UI level automation as such. Repeatable processes act like a human model of automation as such. And for the past few years, due to the enrichment of AI and ML techniques, we also have various aspects as far as cognitive automation is concerned, whether it is, you have a lot of acronyms being thrown around here: cognitive automation, intelligent automation, digital process automation, hyper automation. But basically what it involves is a fusion of these techniques of RPA along with AI and ML techniques, computer vision, and various other aspects, so that end-to-end process can be actually completely automated. This is still, I would say, a goal which is yet to be reached. There is a lot of work in this regard, but we are making small advances as far as the technology is concerned. And coming to the trends, it's quite interesting that regarding the poll that you showed, Ram, because when you look at the key drivers that we asked about, it's remarkably similar to what we see as far as global trends are concerned. And of course, any poll, as you know, just like these pre-election polls, have to be taken with a pinch of salt. But they do give us some insights as to underlying trends as such. And when you see the drivers as such, while increasing the efficiency is a key aspect, various other aspects such as the customer experience are coming to the fore, especially with COVID, because COVID has been a real wake-up call as far as automation is concerned. If you look at the investment areas, for example, you would see that it's mainly the back-end process that have been the focus of investment, mainly because these are the type of process which allow you to do unattended automation, that is full automation of the end-to-end process, unlike the customer facing areas. But the problem that COVID threw up was that a lot of the customer interactions was really impacted, and in where the clients had actually focused only on the back-end process, they were not able to fully utilize their automation as such, or their RPA aspects as such. Though there were some, especially the BFSI sector, who were able to utilize RPA for repapering aspects, such as their recomputation of the loans and the terms and so on. But we do see a dramatic increase as far as process automation is concerned, and especially around the customer servicing areas, because even if you fully automate your backend process, unless you are able to service your customer, your business model, of course, fails. So this is an aspect that has come into the fore as far as COVID is concerned. So business resilience has become an important aspect when you think about actually going about your process automation. And on the flip side, of course, while there are a lot of positive aspects, we still hear about a lot of failures as far as RPA is concerned, whether it is failure to reach the cost benefits originally envisaged, whether it is the cost of implementation, whether it's a speed, and so on. And again, a point again is that a lot of these discussions are only around the technology aspects, the aspects typically around automation, analytics, AI, and all those aspects. But what we emphasize, and I think some of Chris's points were also very, very focused on these areas, where that we need to focus more on the enterprise trifecta, the people, the process, and the technology aspects. Of course, central to all this is the people aspect. I think some of you may remember that at the beginning of this century, the most favorite and the most well-known business acronym was Business Process Reengineering. But BPR has now virtually vanished as an acronym because the change management aspects were ignored at that time, and hence the entire move as such for BPR was a failure, though it has been repackaged now in various other forms. So change management is critical, and not only do you need the buy-in of your stakeholders, you also need the buy-in of all those in your organization as far as the business is concerned. So again, how do you go about this? One way is to understand where these stakeholders come from. For example, your sponsors are more interested in the top line and the bottom line aspects. So you need to look at automating process which actually impact that. At the same time, if, for example, you go in for your automation of your internal process for finance and HR, you get an internal buy-in as such at all levels. So these are aspects you need to actually think about when you go about the people aspects. And regarding the process aspects, when we talk about process, we are not just talking about the implementation aspects. We are talking about the actual selection of process for automation. And like Krish had pointed out, optimization before automation is absolutely important, especially given the fact that in the BFSI sector, there are many legacy processes which are very, very poorly documented, let alone optimized. So this is an opportunity also for organizations to really document, optimize, document, and then automate all the process. And again, like I said, business resilience is coming to the fore. So it's not that you need to think about a full end-to-end optimization. If a process is critical, you can also think about automating certain aspects of it, while the rest, the key aspects of it are handled by the human specialists. And lastly, coming to technology, and I say lastly because we do see from our experience and from the experience of all our clients that it's the people and the process that matter. Technology is, of course, the foundation, but it is the least priority as such when you look at this trifecta. When you look at technology aspects, like Krishnan pointed out, you need to, first of all, think about the implementation aspects in terms of the tools that you bring in. And another aspect is also your technology roadmap as far as your enterprise is concerned. Now, of course, your systems of record, like your mainframes, they are not going to change. That it is only your systems of interactions which are bound to change. And given the current rate of change of technology, you can expect changes every few years down the line. So you need to actually plan for this automation as part of your integral enterprise technology roadmap. So these are the three aspects we think are actually key. And from our experience with all our clients and with the track record that we have, this is something that we are repeatedly pointing out to all our clients. And how do we actually go about this? Like was emphasized in this initial discussion, it's important to be business driven. And a center of excellence model is what we strongly recommend and which has proved to be very successful in all RPA engagements, which have really actually made it to the success gate as such. And when you talk about a center of excellence model, we are talking about people drawn from business units. We are talking about people drawn from HR. We are talking about process specialists. We are talking about IT. These people representing all this, driven by the business, responsible for various aspects of this implementation, like governance, communication, enablement, collaboration, and so on. So this sort of a center of excellence approach for process automation as such is a key enabler as far as RPA or process automation or intelligent automation is concerned. And when you look at an overall roadmap, when we talk about a roadmap of automation, process automation, this is the typical roadmap which has proved to be very successful. A clear enterprise level strategy where you're very clear about why exactly you need to go about automating things. The objectives, it can be merely cost cutting. That can be an aspect, but it can also be other areas like business resilience. It is important that all these aspects be first looked at, and then you decide on which process to go about. And like I said earlier, optimizing the process is critical before you actually go about automating it. The process selection criteria must reflect all your objectives and be chosen accordingly. And given the current state of tools, you can also always go in for quick wins as such, where you take about standard process which are well suitable to rapid automation, end-to-end automation, go about incremental implementation to get buy-in, and then look at specific areas where you can bring in various cognitive aspects, utilizing data which you gather. And here we are talking also about having a very clear data policy, because one aspect of data is that you need to look at the quality of data as well as security, given the regulatory considerations. And data plays a key role when it comes to cognitive and intelligent automation. So this stage-by-stage approach is what we have seen to be very successful in automation initiatives everywhere, as far as processes are concerned. I have a few interesting case studies which are relevant to what we have discussed so far. Coming to these case studies, there are some of the engagements that the RPA Center of Excellence that we have at Expleo Solutions have successfully delivered. And we have expertise in a multiple range of tools. So it's not that we go with a single tool and force fit it into the customer's requirements. Based on the customer's specific needs, their roadmap, we actually provide the consulting services and the strategic direction for them to not only select the tools, but also identify the process and then carry out a POC as well, and then have the COE set up and work on continuous improvement model. So coming to the case studies that I had talked about, this is a typical case study of what would be a standard and RPA automation as such, where you are taking a high volume process which involves a number of FTEs, which has a number of business rules which could lead to manual errors. This is a perfect candidate for an initial automation, process automation, end-to-end process automation, and where you can immediately see benefits. And benefits, direct benefits in terms of cost savings, and also as far as quality of work is concerned, in that manual errors are reduced. A second case study is a typical area where RPA or process automation shines in the sense that it spans across multiple technology stacks. Generally, if you look at the BFSI sector, you do have multiple technologies in place, a mainframe or a mini at the back end. You have most modern technology stacks at the front end. So automation as such over these requires a robust tool which can span these technologies. And this is one area where the process automation tools today are really good at, because they can be used for different technologies, so that a process which spans multiple technologies can be easily automated from end to end. And again, here, this actually helps to eliminate a lot of manual aspects, including improving quality to a great extent. And this case study is a typical example of what I would call is an attended automation prospect. I'm sure that all of you are aware that as far as AI and ML is concerned, over the last 10 years, we have made a great number of advances. We have even as far as the game of Go is concerned, which is considered to be even more complex than chess, we have now programs which can actually beat the highest human expert in the world champion in Go. But one aspect which is probably never going to be conquered by AI and ML, though there is a lot of optimism on that front, is the aspect of handwriting, especially a doctor's handwriting. And I know that that's a challenge that even the doctor himself faces when he looks at his prescription after some time. So, but these are areas actually where you can look at the current solutions where at least you get a great degree of accuracy, so that you can automate to a great extent the process, while you can still have some human intervention to check on certain aspects of this process. So it is not that you need to look at a totally end-to-end automation. You can also look at automating key aspects of it and having a human intervene only at the critical areas. And when you look at process automation tools, a key aspect is the cost aspects, and the way you maximize your utility is an important aspect. So that there are also cases where we have actually helped our clients to utilize their RPA robots when they are not being utilized for production work in test automation. And this actually helps them to leverage their licenses and optimize the costs of using these tools to a great extent. And coming to the aspects of optimizing process, selecting process properly, this is a key aspect before you actually venture into a full-fledged automation, process automation. And this is where you actually require business knowledge, domain knowledge as such, which can help you to actually select the proper process, help to optimize them, and also come up with a proper implementation plan. And this case study with a large insurer is typical of this, where this process was rigorously followed after a earlier, I would say, certain lack of benefits being shown. This process was rigorously followed so that clear benefits could be actually shown from the RPA implementation. And the final case study I have here is more in terms of the cognitive and the AML aspects, where we are now starting to push the boundaries here in terms of automation. So it is not just a straightforward implementation where you just have a rules-based workflow which can be automated. Here we are also looking at tapping into various AI and ML aspects, which will actually help you in predictive analysis as far as your automation is concerned. And anti-money laundering is an area, of course, which all banks are interested in, and which is a key area which can be thought of for this sort of a solution. So I think these case studies give you an idea of the various specific areas in which you can think about as far as process automation is concerned. And to emphasize, the key to success that we think is, one, for it to be very business-led, think of the trifecta, the people aspects, the change management aspects. Think of it in terms of the process aspects. Optimize before automation. Don't think only about totally unattended process. Think also about attended automation to get maximum business benefits, especially business resilience. And the third aspect is, of course, the technology aspects. The right tool which has an open APIs as such to tap into other integrations and fitting into your technology roadmap. And to integrate all this, think about following a COE model which provides you the actual benefits of driving this in a very, very, very clear and transparent manner, and provides benefits to all stakeholders. So I think those are the main points that I want to emphasize. And like I said, from the points that Krish had said earlier, I think many of them resonate from our experience with all our clients. So I think, like I said, Ram, I think you have to add this qualification also to Krish's profile, I think, as being a specialist in this. And I'm sure that Balaji, who's waiting with his insights, will echo some of these aspects also.
Thank you, Vijay. Very interesting, and I think you stole the show with the doctor's prescription in India. I mean, so I think I guess there are people in the audience out there who already have started figuring what to do there. Before we jump into a very interesting discussion, I looking forward to have with Balaji. I do want to go back to the audience with another poll. And I think this will also set the tone for what could be a very interesting discussion we'll have with Balaji. Here's a question, ladies and gentlemen. Which of the following is, in your view, the biggest challenge for automation, right? Process automation. Is it the resistance to change from people? Is it the ability to prioritize the right processes? Is it the right tools and expertise or absence of it? Or is it the investment that you need to make to make this happen? Yeah, it's interesting. I'm having these, and as I mentioned before, all of the above is not an option, unfortunately. So while we are waiting for the audience to poll, there is indeed a question. Going back to what was polled last time, and maybe I'll start with that with you, Vijay, before we move on. Even if it meant efficiency, that was the poll that everybody polled. The question is, doesn't it all mean eventually to increase customer service? I'm not sure if that is really true. I don't know. I mean, any of the panelists, you may want to take that question.
Yeah, if I may take that question up, when you talk about efficiency, it can mean various things to various people. Actually, when it merely focuses on quality as such, the quality of work, and how fast you can do it. And this can relate to any functional area, whether it is HR, whether it is your customer service. So it is not specific to any functional area as such. It's more of a broad-based approach. But looking at various aspects as far as investment and all is concerned, what I would suggest is that we look at from the functional perspective also. Like I said, customer service is the most important aspect. If you are not able to service your customer, there is no point in automating all your processes at the back end if you're not able to interact with your customer. So we need to look at it in a more holistic manner and not, I would say, silo it into various areas. It's all good for a poll as such, for us to get a general understanding, but we need to have a broader look from.
It's not either or, I agree. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be either or. It is certainly not either or. As I said, all of the above has been consciously kept out as an option, but I agree. So let's see the results of this poll, and that's quite interesting. So what we see here is that choosing the right process seems to be the biggest challenge that people have. Balaji, that's quite interesting, and I guess that really sets the tone for what I may have to come to you with. Having done this, and I guess, Balaji, you've done more than, 60 plus processes, you said, in the last couple of years alone that you have helped automating. So if I can start by asking you, what are the guiding principles you have when you select the right process or prioritize the right process, in choosing? Yeah, sorry.
I think that's, first of all, thanks, Ram, and my fellow panelists. Good afternoon. And also the audience. It's good to be here. I think you're asking not an easy question, okay? And I wish I can make the answer as simple as that, because in an organization, more than people, process, systems, everything has to work efficiently. And we had unlimited time and unlimited resources, life would have been much easier. The challenge happens is when there's a competing interest comes across, and you need to manage it in a specific particular way. And it also depends on the life cycle of the organization, what type of teams you have, what type of dependencies. So if you have to sort of make the decision, it's quite multidimensional, depending on which prism you're looking at from. Okay, so a few considerations which Krish clearly articulated, so did Vijay, was in terms of customers. We need to consider in terms of what our regulations are, what is strategic, what is tactical, what is business as usual, the technical capabilities, internal as well as our ecosystem from the vendor's point of view. The type of constraints you have in whether it's a time, resources, okay? So there are many things which happens. The way we approach generally, especially on the larger decision-making process, if I have to make a decision around it, is in terms of looking at the wider strategic intent, the business need, and more importantly, the organizational change management considerations. Because that then sets the tone in terms of what you achieve within that time frame. Because if unlimited time, you'll do everything. If unlimited resources, you'll do everything, right? So that's the first thing we try to keep in mind. And when you think about business, the core to any business is the voice of customer, which can be external customer, which truly so, because because of them we exist. There's a revenue aspect to it, there's a business aspect to it, as well as the voice of customer internally also. Because as Vijay was mentioning, if you look at it, the way organization has formed, especially in the financial services, it was manual, then it went into different applications. So there's silos around it. The evolution of technologies have happened. So you're in a different life cycle when you stand, and you have to hear all these noises when you make that decision. Okay. And this sort of helps us in terms of, so we have like customer satisfaction survey, employee satisfaction survey, the data. So data becomes an important component of what we decide. The complaints, the query managements, okay, benchmarking to the industry, what our competitors are doing. Because you may want to do something just to be, if I use the word of disruption, be in line with the market at that point in time. Okay, so these are some of the things which we consider. And if I have to give an example, and I think it was Vijay who mentioned it. So internally, I think one of the questions also you had resistance, for internal resistance to change. I won't use the word internal resistance to change, because a lot of time we use these acronyms, RPA, BPM. I personally don't understand a lot of these things. Okay, I'll be very honest. But what I do understand is, if somebody tells me something in a simple language, it helps me to understand. So one other thing is, if in this journey, people don't see any benefit of what is going to happen, if they automate, and RPA does the repetitive task of an inputter of a job, what motivation he has to help you in build that RPA? It's not possible. Similarly, there are pain points. For example, and these examples I've used multiple times. Normally, we give staff loan, and every staff can have, right? From management to the junior most clerk can have a staff loan. So we went through a brainstorming session when 4 years ago we talked about digitalization and the best way to approach BPM. Okay, and most of us didn't know how to go about it. Of course, we got a lot of feedback from the consultants, the feedback from the players, industry players, tech players. And when we went across the pole with different staff at different levels to internally, what came across was, why don't we try this staff loan? For two reasons. Sometimes the paper, when it moves from one desk to other, or from geographies also, because we are located in the head office is somewhere else and HR is some other place, it becomes a challenge. Then the usual regulatory around, whether you have any other loans, how much can you repay, the engine around it. The third thing is, which came across is some of the managers have to sign off for the stuff before it goes to HR. Okay, and maybe they're sitting on it. So when we went through that process, so at that time we looked at, okay, we need to engage with the staff. What is the best way to do that? So let's do a BPM of staff loan. And across the value chain, initially a lot of criticism was there, a lot of not understanding was there. So it doesn't mean that people are resistant. They just want to understand more. And you have to be patient because it's a long-term playing game. It's not short-term. Because digitalization cannot happen in 1 year. Okay? And you have to allow people to readjust. And in that exercise, when we went through that, so we went through that process, it really, really helped us in what we do. From an external point of view, if I take about the first thing every banker would talk about is customer onboarding. Okay, whether through an app, through a tablet, through a branch, various channels. So I won't get into the technology of omni-channels and various other things, but simply put together, there's a first experience the customer is having when he's opening the account. It can be from the branch. The branch has to set the process to the central operation who have to do something. And then finally the fulfillment, giving the credit card or debit card and various other things which use external vendors for us. So in that journey, when you look at it, so the customer onboarding is a natural which came across as a process which we need to focus upon and learn from that. We don't claim that we'll understand everything in one go. And once you make it a success around it, it becomes easier. And one beautiful thing came out of that was when we went through that process, suddenly the branch guys said, we are doing extremely well, we are doing quickly because we started getting the metrics. The process metrics are available. The operation is saying, oh, we are doing soon. And the other thing came across as, oh, compliance or somebody else is taking time, for example. But then we realized there are a lot of false positive comes across because the way you capture the data, then the concept of RPA evolved from there. So it wasn't that we planned something with that. It started with the BPM process. So I think there's a lot of learning and we should be open to the idea of how we want to go about it. And we as management or even the staff, because the leaders can come here not necessarily from management. It can be a junior staff in a business who can lead it. So I think that's something which we all ourselves learned. It was great. But normally as a bank, you have to document a process. You have to say what are the benefits, what are not benefits. So things like we consider like, okay, listen, high value, low complexity, or high value, high complexity. Okay. So this type of things we sort of consider to say, okay, what is the things to make it an impact? And of course, there is a level of politics also we need to manage because there's a buy-in which is come. So for example, if a revenue generating area decides this is what I want, for example, then you need to get their buy-in because that may enable you to fast track quite a few other processes. So it's not only about efficiency and various other things. It's all about how do you manage the ecosystem.
But I guess, Balaji, I mean, you touched another point, right? And I want to go back to something else that you touched very briefly, right? You talked about metrics now being measured and suddenly you actually are having a higher consciousness of the data that is being captured, right? I mean, honestly, one may not have 100% of data accurate initially, right? So you embark on a process, on a journey, and then it's a long journey, right? So how critical is data to this whole process and how do you deal with it?
In one word, I have to say just critical. How critical? It is critical, okay? Again, depend on which prism you're looking at from and why it is important. Because normally the whole data is about customer. So for example, just the static data of a customer, having the right telephone number and an email and an address clears a whole lot of efficiency backlog, for example. The other thing is if you have the right metrics and the right data available, your ability to service the customer, the client servicing part of it. Because if you don't service your customer, he has no intention to deal with you. It's as simple as that because it's highly competitive environment and you need to be on the top of it. Okay. Similarly, if I think from a compliance perspective, because now it's getting more and more important. Okay. We need to fulfill the regulatory obligations. So then it's very, very important in which you do in terms of servicing your customer. So the end result may be to service the customer, but why would you make that internal noise which takes time to service your customer? Similarly, from a fraud risk management perspective, because you have to protect your assets and various other things, you may need to do that. And when you build a process which is digitalization for assuming, you also get the metrics to follow through, look where the clogs are and what you want to do with it. So the data is very, very critical from the whichever prism you look at. And it was always important. The new technologies is enabling it much more faster and easier, because some of the tools which some of the panelists spoke about, which is mainly to do with OCR tools or tools like RPA, AI, and or even intelligence scanning, because nowadays you don't have to input anything, which is a COFAX or various other things which people do that. So when you capture the right data at the source, it becomes easier. Previously, organization was suffering with availability of data. So not only you think about availability of data, integrity of data, accuracy of data, and more when you get into digitalization phase, the information security aspect becomes that much important. The client data, how you protect, that is your key asset.
Hello.
And harness it, it can become a challenge. So these are some of the things to look at it. From NBF perspective, in this journey, there was quite a bit of learning. We didn't have all the data. So as you said, you say, okay, there was a brainstorming on customer onboarding. So you can always an open account with knowing just putting few fields, but other fields may not be available to do certain things. So you then make those gap analysis, identify what is required, and then parallelly, when you build this system, you also need to look at your legacy data and fine tune it. Of course, people will talk about structured data, unstructured data, the formatting of data, various other things which come into it. You may need to pick up the right noises and to see how you manage. So the overall data governance, if I have to use, becomes paramount. And data governance doesn't mean that it is again one of the functions. It has to be led at the topmost level at the bank.
Embedded.
Okay. So in our organization, when we talk about data governance, the most of the key stakeholders in the data governance are the CFO, CRO, the head of business, the head of different businesses, the risk guy, the infosec, and the operations. And of course, IT has to be there because they have to make it and enable it happen. And I think these are some of the things which we consider in terms of when we went through that process. So I think it's very important. That's going to lead it. Okay. And the good thing is the technology experts who are there, the tools are available, which make it much more easier. Of course, the life cycle of anything what we do is now shortened. It's not like you can do once and sit back. It has to be an ongoing process of managing and measuring those data.
In fact, that's one of the other implications of this, Balaji, is that, your stakeholders, be it your shareholder or your management or anybody who's investing in any of this, will be wanting to know what has been the return on investment. Right? There is always an impact measurement that always, and there is a element of qualitative aspect to it and a quantitative aspect to it. How do you, or what would your experience that you like to share to the audience on measuring impact here?
Again, I wish it was so easy, because when I go to either to the management or the board, getting a project approval or a budget, and we are at the planning stage, is never going to be easy, right? However, everything starts with your strategic intent of what you want to do, because you're one of the players within the ecosystem. Okay. So for example, most of the time we talk about, we are corporate banking, mainly corporate banking business. We do have retail banking as a thing. Now we're gone into doing Islamic banking and various products. So you build around your strategic intent of what you want to do. You then have to position yourself in terms of deciding what is critical based on, again, various metrics as I'm talking about. Okay. And you come to not a 1 year plan, you have to come up with a 3 year plan or a 4 year plan, depending on how much you can do, because this is a journey. It's not one time exercise. And also, even all the budget is given, you cannot do it in 1 year. Just getting the right partner, implementation partner for each of these things can take a lot of time. Okay.
You're saying the measurement also spans over the 3 year period of the impact measurement?
Yeah. So when I say empowerment, not necessarily 3-year period from that aspect of it, because there are some of those things that somebody says at the functional level, can you do something? So we have some of the measures which we sort of look through. So for example, when we, if I have to put it across, say for example, we talked about account opening. So we say, okay, what is the activity-based metrics we have? We have or we don't have. Why? Because based on that, we can do something. So when we started with, say, internet banking as an exercise, because internet banking is not an option in today's world. That was about 5 years ago, when we thought about it, when we were quite late in terms of coming into that. Because from that time, we started digitalization as a process of what we want to do around it, right? So then you say, okay, we at least now we can track digitally what required to be done and build ancillary parts around it. Okay. Then as one of the panelists mentioned, how do you do certain things on the back end? And that is quite easy at the functional level because there's a clear matrix you can work out. For example, robotics, when we talked about and we learned about it. Okay. So we have moved from X to now 6X in our reconciliation or payment processes. The number of staff, what we do with the same. His question is how you can scale something what you're doing. So that means you need to get into some sort of a metrics of visualizing what our growth path will be.
And start from the top. So basically,
and some of this data question which you asked earlier becomes that much important in terms of what to do. The most important thing in all these things is also the qualitative side, which I want to talk about topics, because when we talk about process, system, customers, the customer wants is always transient. Okay, so you can sit back and say, this is what I've done and finish. There's no motivation for the customer to come to this organization anymore. Okay, at the same time, we have to be relevant in terms of what we are doing. So here, when we sort of go through that process, it's also equally important. How do you build the skill set within your teams? It's easier said than done because a lot of people work in many years in the organization. And that skill set, the resilience what you build in, the change management, the adaptability becomes. And how do you manage and say that, how do you put a return on investment on that? Customer attrition. So I think there are multiple factors, both quantitative and qualitative, which we looked at. There are financial factors, cost to income ratios in terms of what you want to do. That are typical hardcore numbers which you look at. Cost per transaction. Like we can proudly say our cost per transaction has come down more than 70% in the last 4 years. And we get into even overheads and calculation of overheads. To that extent, we go through that processes. And in all these things, how do you measure the customer experience itself? So the customer satisfaction survey shows how well we are doing it. What is the cross-sell ratios we are doing with the customer? Because customer is a basis on which you do what you have to do, right? So in the way we're looking at all these things is, it's never easy because your resourcing is always limited within the time frame. And there is a presentation and our board and management support it. Because in our case, proudly we can say that our management level, and they represent our business is in IT, in a steering committee, IT steering committee. The CFO is in the steering committee. The head of the CEO is in the steering committee. So what happens is we look at most of these things as one goal of what we need to achieve rather than looking at different functions.
No, I think that's a very important point. I think so having a holistic view and going top down, as you rightly articulated, Balaji, very useful and very interesting and real life experiences from what you have done here. Thank you for that. I'm going to open up for a few questions from the audience, if you don't mind. But before we did that, let's run our third poll for the day. And here it is. Which of the following functions would therefore be your primary candidate? People in the audience should vote. Would it be customer service? Would it be back office operations? Would it be finance, accounting, or would it be human resources? And there could be other areas as well, but we picked the top 4 that the audience can poll. And while the audience poll is on, I have a few questions. So if I can actually pose this question to Vijay, to you, what would be the difference between intelligent RPA and artificial intelligence? Are they interchangeably used?
Well, there's a lot of confusion around all these areas, such a lot of acronyms. But basically, when you talk about intelligent RPA or intelligent process automation, what you're looking at is a technical solution which can also interface with an AI aspects. So typically, I showed a case study where we talked about anti-money laundering, where actually the process as such is used to also collect data, and this is used to interface with an AI solution, which can help you to do predictive analysis. So it's a fusion of various aspects, I would say. So we need to be clear about that. A process solution which involves all this data collection as well as predictive aspects, that's where AI comes in. It's not a standalone AI solution for some problem. It's more of amalgamation of the process automation along with these techniques.
Very useful. Thank you, Vijay. Now, there is another question here, and the question is, what are the top 3 areas in a tier 2 or 3 bank that could be considered for RPA? And guess what? The answer to the poll is really going to be the answer to this question. So I'm actually going to go into the poll answers now. And what we have here is an overwhelming majority going for back office operations more than customer service or finance. I can see Krish nodding there. Krish, you have a view on this?
I think that would be the best start. And so one of the interesting questions that the participant asked was, is it all not going to the customer service? And my answer would have been absolutely yes. Not necessarily external customer, internal customer as well, but both are customers end of the day. Your regulators are also your customers. So anything and everything that you do is to the customer. But I absolutely agree with this poll. Back office operations could be the first start of it. There is no reason why you can't do a finance and accounting or human resources or customer service. Back office operations is where the error rate could be more as well because of the amount of data, amount of transaction that they deal with. That is also where pretty much most of the critical transactions happen. Right, finance. It's about the cost, and it is about the money. So that could be a great start. And having to combine the first answer and this, it's about enhancing efficiencies, standardization, controls. Then back office operation is the best candidate to start.
Thank you for that, Krish. Well, we are pretty much out of time, and we are 3 minutes past the schedule. But I still want to, with the permission of the audience, go for the last question, which is really the takeaway. And this time I'm also going to allow the panelists to vote. And this question for everyone is this. In your view, the success factor for a process automation program, and if you had to measure it at the end of it, would be having built the right visibility, managing inhibitions, getting the right partner, or choosing the right process. And with the answers that comes to this poll, we will conclude this conversation. But before that, one last question. There is someone here who's anonymous, so I don't know who's this question from, but the question is, what about governing legal regulation in process automation? Any of the panelists would like to take that question? Is there a legal implication in the process automation? Balaji.
Legal implication, and what was the full question, was it?
The question was, let me go back to the question again, sorry. What about the governing legal regulation in process automation? Now, I don't know who this person is, so I don't know the details of the question, but that's what it is.
I think whether there's a legal implications, I myself not fully aware. In terms of when you say legal is such a broad subject.
Is there a regulatory implication, I guess maybe is what he's intending to ask here.
But in terms of regulatory implication, I'm not sure, because in banking industry, if you look at it on the BFSI segment, most of the banks do automation across various other things, right? So one of the regulators look for is whether you're compliant with the regulations. How you achieve it is up to the organization to do it. Whether you need to have a governance of managing his answer should be yes. What type of governance structure you need to have, which is more internal in nature. Whether there's a legal implications of it, at least I'm not aware of that.
Got it. No, I think that's fair. I think it's more about regulation, as I think we deem it. Well, before we conclude the session, here is the poll results. Well, there is an overwhelming majority that believes choosing the right process would be the most critical success factor. And I don't think that's surprising considering what all of you have actually spoken in the last hour or so. So, I mean, without much ado, may I take this opportunity once again to thank Krish, Vijay, Balaji. Very wonderful session, very interesting. If there are other questions that come our way, we will obviously pass it on to you. Audience, please feel free to write to us. We will do our best to actually get them answered from the panelists and get back to you. Thank you once again for staying with us, and thank you, panelists, for a wonderful, enriching, enlightening session.